Hello and welcome to part 18 of my video series on how to use Blender 2.6. This is part 2 of a two-part video series on how to do camera tracking in Blender, which is a new feature of Blender 2.61 or newer. So if you haven't seen part 1, I'll put the link on the screen right now. Go ahead and watch that part first. If you already have watched that part, continue watching this video. If you haven't, come back to this video afterwards. So in the last part of the video, in part 17, we made a folder of JPEGs from a source video. We used Blender's video sequence editor to export a series of JPEGs, and we exported at 720p. In other words, all the images were 1280 by 720. And you should have created a new project in Blender with the resolution of 1280 by 720 at 24 frames per second if you're using my footage. If you're using your own footage, that's okay. You should be matching the resolution of your footage as well, of course, and the frame rate. So since the last video, I've gone ahead and tracked a whole bunch of more points in the video. I'm just going to kind of go over a little bit of what I did to get all these points. I, of course, added new points by control clicking in the video. And I found there was actually quite a bit of problems when tracking different points. Of course, every frame of the movie is a little bit different, so if you're tracking a point, it's going to be a little bit different on every frame, and Blender can get confused between tracking one point in the video from frame to frame to frame. I'm going to go ahead and track one more point just to kind of illustrate this point, and I'll talk about a few things you can do that I didn't talk about in the last video. So I'm going to track the end of this crack in the pavement throughout the entire video. So I'm going to control click, add a new point. And because it's the end of a very high contrast area, in other words, it's the end of a black thing and there's gray around it with some white and some darker areas of gray, this should be able to track fairly okay. So I'm on frame 1 right now. Of course, if you go back to frame 0, you don't see anything, so that could be a little bit confusing. And there's a few more options that we can take a look at. If I scroll up in my left panel, we can track either forwards or backwards, but of course we're on frame 1, so we can't track backwards really. And we can track automatically, so we can play and track automatically forward or automatically backward, or we can do it manually by going one frame at a time. And going one frame at a time can actually really help if it's not working too well, if you're just playing the video and tracking while you're playing. There's also a few different trackers that you can use. There's different technologies for how it tracks and the algorithms that it uses. On the right panel on the right hand side, if you go down and scroll down to tracking settings, there's a few different kinds of trackers that you can use. There's really two kinds. There's one called SAD, and there's another tracker called KLT. And the one that I've been using, I didn't actually realize this when I was doing it, I was using a hybrid of the two. And it's worked fairly well. Of course, you can play around and see which one works better for you, which one is better for your video footage. But hybrid has been working okay for me. Of course, you can play with these settings, and if you hover over them, you'll see what they mean. You can limit the number of frames that you are tracking when you press the forward or back play buttons in this, and of course 0 means unlimited. And of course you can change the box size of your actual tracker and the search area. So if your video is kind of moving very fast, if your camera is moving very fast, and this point that we're tracking moves more than that amount from frame to frame. So if you're really kind of rotating the camera quickly, you'll want to make this area bigger or smaller. Or if you're tracking a larger area, you might want to have a larger search area. Or again, if you're having a smaller search area, you might want to make this a little bit smaller as well. I think that's okay. You shouldn't have too many problems with this. But I'm going to go ahead and track a few frames just to see how it goes. And okay, it worked pretty well, so I'm going to just press play. And that seemed to work pretty well. I'm going to go through and kind of scrub through it, and I'm looking at this area to see if it tracked fairly well. It is kind of jittery. Now if you have any problems, if you're tracking a point in your video and it kind of goes awry and it kind of goes over to some other point and keeps on tracking and it's incorrect, what you can do is go back to the last frame that was correct. So let's say it tracked okay from frame 1 to frame 30 or 49, but then from frame 50 and onwards it tracked something else by accident, like it jumped to a different point. You can go to the next frame And then you could press, by pressing your arrow key of course, and you could press clear after. And that would clear everything after frame 50. If it was after frame 49, I would just use my arrow key and press clear after. If you're tracking backwards, in other words, if you're using the back nudge or manual frame by frame, or you're tracking backwards, you can clear before as well. So if it accidentally tracks the wrong object, or it jumps to a different object, you can clear frames using these. You can even track two things. Let's say that something starts in the video. Let's say that you're tracking something like on the back fence in this video, and after about 40 frames it goes out of the video. And then you go to the end of the video and you start tracking with a new tracker at the same point because it comes back into the video. And then you realize that you have two different markers for the same point. You can actually select two different points. Of course, I wouldn't with these two because they're not the same point. But you can actually join two tracks into one. So there's quite a bit of options here to make this process as painless as possible. It is pretty painstaking, so I don't blame you if you get kind of frustrated while you're working with this. So I believe I was tracking the end of that crack in the pavement, and it was kind of jittery. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to erase everything. I'm going to erase all the data. The data, of course, is in the yellow bar, and I've only gone up to halfway because I erased everything after frame 49. I'm going to go over to my left panel and press clear after. So I only have one frame right now that's tracked, which is my manual frame. Excuse me. And I'm going to change the tracking type and see, or the tracking type, or the tracker type, to see if it works any better with a different technology. So I'm going to go and try KLT and see if that does any better of a job. I'm going to try just going to the next frame. Now, of course, when you change the tracker type, it only changes the type of the one that you have selected. It's not going to affect the other ones because you've already tracked them. And it seems to be doing pretty well. I'm going to go ahead and see if it tracks fairly well. So I'll just go through. And it got lost. That didn't actually do as good of a job as the previous one. It's still jumping around a little bit. It's jittering back and forth. So maybe what I'll do is I'll try the other one. I'm going to clear after, and I will go and change my tracker from KLT to SAD, and I'll try tracking a few manual frames first, and let's see what happened. That one made it all the way through. So in the case of this video, the SAD tracker seemed to do a better job. Now that actually seems even more jittery than the hybrid one that I did. So I'm going to go ahead and clear after, and we're going to switch it back to hybrid. Oopsie. And track it again. So I'll do a few frames manually, and I'll play. And it got stuck at frame 42. That's interesting. Let's kind of nudge through it and see what happens. Now it kind of got lost, so it actually turned the tracker off. So I'm going to scroll down and enable the marker again and place it correctly. And I'll scroll up to see my preview. I'm going to use my arrow keys just to kind of see what it's doing. I'm going to move it a little bit more right about there. And I'll track it manually a few times. Oh, it got lost again. Not sure why it worked well the first time, but not after that. So I'm just going manually through it. I only have 100 frames. So I think it'll be not too bad to just go through it manually. And there we go. So I'm going to scrub through and make sure everything happened okay. And that seemed to look pretty good. So I've got about 25, if not 30 points tracked. They don't all last the entire length of the video. There's more tracks in the first half of the video, and some of them on the back fence especially drop off after you see all the kind of ones at the top that have been cut off that are no longer enabled. Those ones only go up to partway through the video before they go out of the video frame. Okay, I'm going to save this. I've made a few iterations. I'll make one more. I'll go save as and press the plus, and now we're on 03 right now. We'll have by_04 as the file name for the next version. Okay, so now we're going to do some tracking. When you are using footage, you need to know, or you need to let Blender know what camera that you were using. Every camera has a slightly different sensor size. In other words, the CMOS or the CCD sensor of the camera is a little bit different, and that makes a difference. So if you go on your right panel, I believe, under footage settings, you actually, that's not it. I'm going to find it. Camera data. That's what it is. If you make this area a little bit bigger, you need to actually tell it what camera and what focal length and as much information about the camera as you possibly can, including the distortion of the lens that you're using. Now, I realize that not everybody who's watching this video knows a lot about photography, but there actually are camera presets, and there are more or quite a lot of cameras listed here. And just as it happens that my camera is listed, the Canon 600D, which is the T3i DSLR camera. So I'm going to select that camera, and a few of the things like the sensor and the pixel aspect ratio will get set up. The focal length of my lens was about 17 millimeters. And of course, because of the sensor size of the camera, if you know anything about SLR cameras, the sensors are smaller than film, so 17 millimeters is actually not a true 17 millimeters in a DSLR, unless it's a full frame camera, which mine is not. We need to press the center button to find out the center of the footage, because it needs to know that, which is 640 by 360, which is half of 1280 by 720. So it finds the exact center of the video. And I don't know the lens distortion of my camera, but we can actually solve that a little bit later. So let's go ahead and do some solving. If you go down to the header of your camera tracking window, you can change it from tracking to reconstruction. So I'm going to change it to reconstruction. And there are some buttons on the left-hand side. One of them is set as background. And what this is actually going to do is it's going to take your 3D scene. So I'm going to make a 3D view here. It's actually going to put the video that you imported as the background in this window, which will really help you out. So I'm going to press T to hide my tool shelf in there. And I'm going to view through my camera, so I'll press 0. Oops. My keyboard shortcuts aren't set up anymore, so I'll go to cameras and view as camera. There we go. So when I press set as background, it'll actually put the video into the background through my camera in my 3D scene. Now I have a cube in here. It actually doesn't look too bad as it is, but of course the camera does not match the movement of my footage camera yet. So we have to make it match. So in this window over here, I'll make this window smaller. Maybe make this side panel smaller as well. We're going to make try to solve the camera solution. So I'm going to press A to deselect all of my points, all of my trackers, and press A again to select them all. And let's see if I can find this quickly. Maybe we're not quite there yet. I think I have to go back into tracking, and aha, there's a solve section. So I should have done this first before I set that background, but that's okay. I'm going to solve my camera motion. So I'll just press solve camera motion with my marker selected, and it's going to go through and see if it can figure it out. And it says that I have an average solve error, and this is very important, of 0.9236. Any solve error between 0 and 3 is very good. And in fact, this is the best camera solve that I've ever had before. I've even had over 100, which is a very bad solve. In other words, if your markers aren't correct, or they jitter too much, or you don't have enough markers on different planes. In other words, you need to have markers not just on the ground plane, but you need to have more higher up and in kind of as varied positions as you can in your video footage. Then you won't get a very good track. Or if markers slide around, or if they jump and you have mistakes in them, it won't track very well. I got a very good tracking number with this. It's 9.236. I might even be able to improve that. I'm going to save this though, because that's such a good track. I'm going to save that, and go down to Cleanup, and I'm going to press Clean Tracks with all these markers selected. I can press A and A again to select them all. I'll press Clean Tracks. And now I'm going to solve this again, so I'm going to press Clear Solution. And this time we're going to refine. We're going to try to refine, figure out, or let Blender figure out what the lens distortion on my lens on my camera is. I'm not using the default kit lens on the SLR. I have a special Sigma 17 to 70mm lens on my camera. So I'm going to press Refine, and we're going to refine the focal length and the K1 and K2, which are the distortion amounts. So I'll press Clear Solution again and Camera Motion. Let's see what the error is this time. 0.4993, so it actually improved by half of a point. That's a very good track. In fact, that's very, very accurate. I'm quite happy with that. So I'm going to go back now. Even though we've solved the camera has not moved yet. So what we have to do is go to our reconstruction window, which is kind of a sub window of the movie clip editor window, and I'm going to press Setup Tracking Scene. That's the very last step. Setup Tracking Scene will actually make the camera match, and it'll also place a bunch of empties, which are special objects that don't render, where all of my tracking points are in 3D space. So I'll go ahead and press Setup Tracking Scene. And it actually, as you can see, put empties or little kind of just cross, just lines intersecting each other where all of my markers were. And if I scrub through my video, you will see that now this camera actually matches the movement of the camera in my live scene. So as you can see, I'm actually going to select that plane and press H to hide it. And I'm going to move this up. I'm going to go to my front view really quickly. So we'll go to View Front because I don't have that set up properly. Aha, they're not all in the ground yet, so I'm going to fix that first. I'm going to press View Camera first. And there's still one problem. When you make this, when you actually solve it, it doesn't know what your ground is yet, and it doesn't quite know how your camera should be tilted, or where your ground should be, or the scale of the scene itself. Before we do that though, I'm going to make this video background a little bit more opaque, so I'll press N to get my sidebar up. And I'm going to go down to Background Images, and it's checked because it automatically added a background image when I pressed Set as Background. I'm going to set the opacity of 001.jpg, that's the film strip, or the sequence of JPEGs, all the way up to 100%. And now, I'll go back over to my movie clip editor, and we have to define a few things. So I'm going to press A to deselect all. We're going to define what the ground is in this, what should be actually the ground plane, in other words, 0 on the z-axis, by selecting some markers and defining that as the ground. So I'm going to go ahead and select 3, and that's important, 3 markers in my video. And I'm going to find the little section that says Set Floor. So under Orientation, the button says Set Floor. And that will actually reorient all of the things in my scene over here. So I'll press Set Floor. And that kind of made everything that was on the ground in here, or 0 on the z-axis in my 3D scene. So now I'm going to press one that I think is about in the middle of my scene. And I think that one is probably the middle of my scene. I'm going to press Set Origin with that one selected. And let's see if I can find 2 that will act as my x-axis. The x-axis, remember, goes kind of back and forth. So I'm going to maybe select maybe that one, and that will be my x-axis. So that kind of will go perpendicular to my camera. That's not going to work. Oh well, I'm not sure. I've never actually done that before. And we want to set the scale. So I'm going to select 2 points in my tracker, or two trackers. And I get to define how far apart those are going to be in my scene. Every unit in Blender, so Blender units are what's used in Blender, Usually most people think of those as meters. So I'm going to define between here and here. I think it's a little bit more than 1 meter. So I'm going to type in 0 or 1.3 meters, which is about 4 feet, maybe about 4 feet. And I'll press set scale with 2 markers selected. Okay, so now let's see what our 3D scene looks like. The cube is really, really huge, so I'm going to scale that down. And in fact, I'm going to go to my front view first. And I'm going to move that up to the ground. I'll press 5 so I really see the ground. I'm not using the keyboard shortcuts. I'll do that actually right now. User preferences, input, emulate numpad. That'll let me use my number row to position everything correctly. Now you'll see that I have a lot of points on the ground, which is good because I made a lot of the points in my movie when I made my markers. A lot of them are actually on the ground. So you'll see some of the other points in my video, like there's a couple on the back fence. Those are empties, which can be selected. And these empties just kind of give you an idea of where things are, where your points, where your markers are in your video. So let's go and press 0 again to get back to my camera. And let's kind of scrub through that. This cube should now stay on the ground perfectly when I move my video, or when I go through my video. And as you can see, it's working really well. I've got, well, it's actually staying in the exact same spot. This is a very good tracking solution. So now if I render, because I pressed set up tracking scene, it actually made a whole bunch of things work for us well. If I press F12 now, it will actually render our final render with our background movie in it, which we couldn't do before. That is set up using nodes, and I haven't talked about nodes yet, but nodes are basically how we can add background images and apply filters to video clips. It's going to require its own series of videos, so I haven't talked about it yet, but these are the nodes, or filters if you're used to, or if you used Photoshop or GIMP before. Every one of these boxes represents a filter, like blur, or masks, or outputs and inputs. In other words, every one of these boxes is either a filter, like a Photoshop filter that can change the color, or add a mask, or add a new image, or it's a source, like our render, or our background movie. Some of these are, in fact, this movie clip is the sequence of JPEGs. The render layer is the things that we're rendering. In fact, there's a few different render layers. And they all kind of come together. They all kind of merge together and translate to our final render, which is going to be our scene with any 3D objects that we add into it. Now, if I go back to my 3D viewport, I'm going to get rid of my tracker because I don't need it anymore. I can go ahead and add objects, so I'll press Shift A, and I'm going to add a monkey head. Now where did that monkey head go? Aha, it's up there. I'll press 3 to go to my side view, rotate it around so it's kind of sitting on the ground. In fact, I might make it sit on the cube, so I'll shrink it down. And I'll put it onto the cube right there. You rotate it a little bit more, or the other way, and press 1. And I'll go back to my camera view by pressing 0, and rotate that on the Z-axis. And we'll add a material to it. Add a new material, and I'll make that material red. And then maybe not specular at this point in time. So I'll turn on specular. And maybe we'll add something onto this wooden structure here. So what I'll do is I'm going to find that empty. So I'll go to the camera view and I'll select that empty and that empty. And those are going to tell me where the edge of that board, or the two edges of that board, are. So now I'm going to go into my camera view. And as you can see, if I go to the top view, the board is going to be that wide. So I'm going to put my 3D cursor right about there. And I'm going to press Control or Shift A, add a new cube. I'm going to shrink it down to be about the right width. Now I don't know exactly how wide it is, but I'm going to scale it on the x-axis, and again. And now I'll go back to my camera view by pressing 0. Now it's not showing up for some reason. I'm just going to quickly figure that out. Why is that not showing up? Oh, because it's way out, or it's way high up. I didn't check from two different views. We're going to put it down to right about there. And of course it's way too tall, so I'm going to shrink it down, oops, just on the z-axis to about the thickness of the board. Right about there should be good. So I'll press 0, and I got it wrong. Or the trackers aren't in the right spot. So it's pointing in the wrong direction, but I do know that that marker is the close edge of that board. So I'm going to select the cube again, and press RZ, and I'll rotate that to about the right orientation. And I'll press 7 again. In fact, I want to find the marker again, so I'm going to grab this and just move it out of the way for now. I'll find that marker again, or that empty, and go to the 7 top view. And why did it select the camera? I'll go back. I'll press all. It's selecting everything. Okay. I've got that marker selected. I'll go back to my top view. Now where is that marker? I'm not sure. Okay. Oh, it's right below, that's why I couldn't see it. Okay, so it's that marker right there. Maybe what I'll do is go into wireframe mode. And I'm going to put that right about there, and then move it down, because I moved it up. Right about there. And now we'll go back to my camera view. And because I'm in wireframe mode, it'll make it easier now. So I'm going to scale that down quite a bit. So I'll press S. And maybe there. Now it's too wide, so what I'll do is I'll just bring that side face inwards or closer to me. Now because these arrow keys, or the gizmo is not pointing in the right direction, I want to be able to point exactly into the cube. I can actually change my gizmo orientation from global to normal, and that will let me drag that in directly inwards. So that's about right. This obviously isn't a flat ground, so it's not going to be perfect, but you can spend more time to get it perfect as you would desire. But now you can see I can make something sit on that wooden structure. In fact, I think I'll do that. I'm going to press Shift S and put my cursor to selected. So put my cursor right about there, and press Shift A and add a UV sphere, and of course scale it way down and move it straight up on the global axes. And I will render that out. Now if I didn't want that bar to be there, or that cube to be there, I could actually make that cube, we want the shadow, so I like the shadow on it. I'll press F12 again to show you what I mean. The shadow is necessary for that cube, or that sphere, but we don't want to actually see the cube, because we want it to just have a shadow but not have this cube show up. So I'm going to get rid of that cube by making a material that just shows shadow. So I'll go with my cube selected, I'll press New, and under the shadow area, if I can find it, there it is at the bottom. If I press shadows only and then change shadow and distance to shadow only, and I press F12 again, that's actually a material that now only shows shadows, like a matte material for blue screening. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about lighting in this video. In fact, what I might do, just to finish off this video, is I'm going to unhide my ground. So I'll unhide it, and in my outliner window, I'll press 0 again. And now where is my ground? Aha. These are layers down here. If you're familiar with Photoshop or GIMP, these boxes are layers. And it matters what layers you put things on because of the setup of this, of how we set up this scene, or how it did it automatically for us when we match the camera. I'm going to go ahead and select that, do the same thing with that plane as well. So I'm going to go to the materials, press new, go down to shadow, and press shadows only and shadow only. And so now that material for that ground plane is just shadows only as well. Let's see if that worked. Aha! So now we have a shadow on the ground, which would be good for making our scene realistic. And there is a problem with the shadow underneath the cube that we made, but I'm not going to solve that now. I'm going to end this video now, and I'll talk about compositing in a future video. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.